Hello everyone and welcome once again to the View from the Midwest. It's time for another Bleedin' Blue look at the NHL Central. So let's get right into it. Well, the final piece from the NHL Central fell, and it was the St. Louis Blues getting knocked out in the Western Conference Finals by the San Jose Sharks 4-2. St. Louis didn't necessarily equate themselves very well in those last two games. They lost 6-3 and 5-2. The 6-3 game, two of those goals were empty net goals, so technically it was a little bit closer than it appears in the final score, although that isn't much comfort to St. Louis Blues fans. And then the 5-2 game, it was 4-0 before St. Louis even scored a goal, and then Vladimir Tarasenko showed up out of nowhere, decided he was finally going to put some goals in, and cut it to 4-2 before San Jose ended up with another empty net goal. It was a very disappointing end for the St. Louis Blues, especially the way it played out. I mean, the going down 4-0 was bad enough, and then to rub salt in the wound, Vladimir Tarasenko, who we have, myself, other people on the Bleedin' Blue website, the St. Louis beat writers, just about everybody that could write about it, wrote about it, with Vladimir Tarasenko and what was going on, why he just flat out disappeared, not only in terms of point production, but just overall play, why he disappeared. And then all of a sudden he shows up in the very last game and scores 2 goals and pads his stats a little bit, but it was too little too late at that point. So it was a disappointing all-around finish for the St. Louis Blues. But on the same token, it's not a complete failure either, because the St. Louis Blues hadn't made the Western Conference Finals, whatever kind of label you want to put on it, because I know that they've kind of changed the names and everything, but they hadn't made it that far to that round since 2001, and it hadn't been since 1986 before that. And then before that, I believe they hadn't made anything that far since 1970, when they actually went to the Stanley Cup Finals. So it's a step in the right direction for this St. Louis Blues team. It's going to be an interesting offseason, because there are still changes that need to be made. This team was very good. They had a heck of a run to get to the final spot to where they did, but it wasn't quite good enough. And the players that they have on the roster as currently constituted aren't necessarily going to be able to get them to that next step. But the good thing is, we've gone through playoff seasons past where you almost wondered if they would have to blow up the entire roster. Now all of a sudden you're almost in kind of the opposite point of view, to where it's like, well, we need to keep the majority of what we have and just add a piece or two here. Well, now all of a sudden you've got several key restricted free agents, unrestricted free agents, possible trade players. Kevin Shattenkirk comes to mind. So you've got a lot of moving pieces that are really going to kind of determine what you can do in terms of what you bring in just pure free agency. So the St. Louis Blues are going to be trying to sign a lot of their own guys first, and then see where the chips fall as they may in terms of free agency. But that's going to be true of a lot of the Central Division teams. It's really going to be an interesting offseason overall for everybody involved, because everybody's got decisions to make. If you're Winnipeg, obviously the big one is going to be Dustin Byfuglien. I don't necessarily know what his contract situation is, but I know that there are a lot of whispers that he will not come back to Winnipeg. That isn't necessarily contract related. That might be that they try to move him somewhere, although I think he's making a lot of money, so that might be kind of difficult to move. But that's their big decision. They have a lot of other decisions to try to get out of that basement area. After that, then you've got Colorado. They need to figure out what's going on there. They obviously have a decent core to that team, because they finished top of the division 2 years ago. But you've missed the playoffs, top of the division, missed the playoffs. and that's not necessarily a good recipe for success. Then you've got the Nashville Predators. They've got a few pieces that are going to be moving around, but they also need to kind of try to solidify their goaltending situation, according to our friends over at predlines.com. They had a good article there, as they are probably going to be in search for a better quality backup goaltender, because you can't necessarily run Pecorine into the ground every single year. Even if you want to bring in somebody that isn't necessarily a known name, but is somebody that could potentially supplant Rene in the near future. And that's another situation that they're going to have to look at. Then all of a sudden you get to the Chicago Blackhawks. The Blackhawks are always going to be the Blackhawks as long as they have Taves and Kane. It's hard to envision them falling off the map anytime soon. But they're also in a similar situation to where they have been the past couple times where they've won cups, to where you've got big names who are going to be asking for pay raises, and the Blackhawks aren't necessarily going to be able to afford it, because you've got so much money tied up in Caves, Tane, Hossa, and a couple other guys as well. So guys like Shaw might be on the move. Their defense is still a little bit in flux, and they obviously were missing guys like Patrick Sharp and Duncan Keith, who went out with that suspension very quickly. So they've got a lot of decisions to make. And then the Dallas Stars. The Dallas Stars are pretty much solidified for the next couple years. They're going to be a force to be reckoned with. They're young, they're talented, they're supremely talented when it comes to scoring. I don't see them falling off of that mark anytime soon. But the goaltending. Are you going to go with Niemi? Are you going to go with Lettinen? Are you going to just say, we're going to have to eat some of these contracts and look for somebody else? Because right now they've got $10 million tied up in two goaltenders, neither of which they seem to have any confidence that will be able to lead them to that next step for them. And then the St. Louis Blues, obviously you've got a lot of decisions to make there. Is David Backes coming back? Is he worth the money that he's going to be asking for? Can he bring Troy Brouwer back? Is it going to be a battle between those two? Is it going to be one or the other? Are you going to try to trade Kevin Shattenkirk off? He had a horrendous playoff season, but he's still a decent point producer, at least in the regular season. Needs to up his defensive game. Can you necessarily capitalize on that, especially in the offseason? Maybe bring somebody in that you will have for a full season as a replacement, as opposed to trying to wait until the trade deadline? Or do you hope that you can try to work something out with him and maybe skim a little bit off the bottom end and trade a couple guys off of that? A lot of questions for all the teams in the NHL Central, but there's still a lot of good talent in that division. I don't see enough players leaving from any of the teams involved to necessarily take away that moniker that I believe we all think, that it is probably the toughest division in all of sports, not just the NHL. So it's going to be an interesting offseason. Stay tuned to this space. We're going to try to keep you updated with all the stuff that's going on. Obviously, we'll focus on the Blues mainly, but since it's an NHL Central recap as well, we'll give you all the news from some of the other teams as well. What do you think? What do you want your team to do in the offseason? What are some moves that you want them to make? Let us know down in the comments section. Also, check out the bleedandblue.com article. Obviously, if you're watching the video linked on that page, you're already doing that. But we've got all the Blues stats from the last week and a little bit of a recap at the end of the season as well. But until the next time, I'll see you then.